It was supposed to be the biggest public transit infrastructure project in Scarborough's history, a nearly $4 billion three-stop subway that would connect the inner city with the Scarborough Town Centre. All three levels of government supported it, despite the fact that planners and urban experts thought it made no logical sense at all. But what we didn't know was that behind the scenes, a lot was going on to make a problematic plan better. And the 65th Mayor of Ontario's capital city, John Tory, joins us now to explain how that all happened. Your Worship, welcome back to TVO.
Nice to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Well, you were here 8 months ago, and we did talk about the Scarborough subway, and here is what you had to say on that occasion. Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
I think on the principle of building a subway, all three governments made decisions on that. In fact, all three of them had elections since they took that position, and in all cases, those who took the positions were re-elected. You know, so it's hard to sort of say, well, gosh, there's this huge groundswell against this. I think people are saying you made a decision for once in your lives, you politicians, stick to it and actually do something.
What changed?
Well, first of all, I would say not much, because if you looked at what I was saying there, which is that we should stick to something, namely building a subway to Scarborough, and do something and get on with it, that's what we're doing. But did we take the opportunity, based on some professional advice offered by our planning staff and others, to make it better? Yes, we did. Is that part of your obligation when you're in a position of responsibility like mine? I believe so. And so that's exactly what we did. But the principle of what was being spoken about then, 8 months ago, and today, and before that, which is a subway to Scarborough, an extension to the Bloor-Danforth subway line, that's what we're doing.
One of the things in that interview you also said to me was, the universe will unfold as it should. And I wonder in hindsight whether you were trying to sort of subtly tell me, we're not done with this story.
The answer is yes, because from the time I was sworn in, I started to talk to the provincial people in particular, because I knew that there were ways we probably could improve the subway. And I will tell you, at the beginning, there wasn't much take-up on the whole notion of even suggesting there was any better way to do this. And I'm not being critical in saying that. I just understood completely. They were saying, you know what, this issue has been settled through a number of different elections. I mean, I got elected saying I would build it. The provincial people did. The federal people did. But as time went on, and with the help of our professional staff, including Jennifer Keesmaat, who you're going to be chatting with, we did find what I believe to be a better way. And we went out then and talked to all the same people, and they all sort of said, yeah, this has some legs. And so I think when you find something like that that can be better, but that maintains the integrity of the principle you were talking about, which is the extension of subway rapid transit into Scarborough, then you should float it and put it out in front of people.
This seemed, though, the previous plan seemed pretty set in stone. So I wonder sort of who made the first move to reopen the notion that maybe there's a better way?
I did. When I say I did, we did, Toronto, and we went to the province, and then we went to the feds, and we, as I've described it, we kind of went in broadening concentric circles of people. And, the last step in this before we took it public, because frankly, had the reaction been different, Steve, we might not have done it, but we went to the Scarborough councillors and sort of said, and other city councillors, and said, so what do you think of this? And when the response was overwhelmingly positive, it having been positive everywhere else, that's when we knew we could take it forward. And one of the objectives of it was, yes, to build a subway, and yes, now to build other rapid transit that will serve other parts of the east end of the city, but also to develop a broader consensus, because this was a war. I mean, and it was a war sort of attrition, where sooner or later somebody was going to perhaps move a motion that might have resulted in this subway being canceled from the city's perspective.
Well, it only passed by what, 2 votes?
Anyway? and so I knew that it was at risk, and I knew what I wanted to do certainly was to find a way to solidify the connection to the rest of the city by subway rapid transit, and at the same time get this consensus. And I think we're on the way to doing that now.
Did you meet with the Premier directly one-on-one on this?
I meet with the Premier once a month, and I did discuss it with her, and she was taken as part of the concentric circles. Obviously, I don't mean to diminish her position by saying that, but we went after we had talked to people like Brad Dogood and some of the Scarborough people, because we knew from the first discussion I had way back when I was first mayor, she said, go talk to Brad Dogood about that, i.e. I'm not going to be getting on board any change to anything unless he's on board, he being the local minister.
Right.
And so, yes, we had discussions with her, yes.
So Dogood got on board first, then you met with the how does it work? Do you like walk into her office with a bunch of maps and say, we want to do this and that?
Sort of. I mean, we have a meeting once a month. One of the great things, and I commend the Premier for this, is that she meets with me once a month, and we discussed a roster of Toronto issues. It's basically any agenda that the two of us want. I mean, we have things that we're interested in talking with one another about. And so if I walk in on something like the Scarborough subway, yes, we walk in with a map and say, here's what we're thinking, here's why it makes sense. and she actually saw a more complete presentation of the case for making a change. And she said, well, it seems to make some sense to me. And she knew by then that her minister and her local MPPs were favorably disposed to this surfacing, for discussion, which is what's happened now.
And is the next thing out of your mouth, and we get the same money, right? Is that what you say?
Steve, if she told me the money wasn't going to be there, then I wouldn't have accomplished much by changing the nature of the subway and having the money withdrawn. My fear was that if, for example, the city council in Toronto canceled its support for the subway, that would be the next thing that would happen, was the province would say, we were in for that subway, we're out now, so forget it. And they're $600 million plus, more than that. In fact, they're more than that. It's the feds that are in for $600 million plus. And so my main concern was to make sure that whatever we were putting forward, that the money would still be there from the other governments, because they could just say, well, we're not in for that project, thanks very much.
So who'd you meet with the feds?
Well, we've met with a whole host of people, of course, and it was at a time that when I initially started exploring this, when the previous government was there. And so we talked most frequently about Toronto matters with Joe Oliver. And then subsequent to that, we met with and talked with a number of the ministers, because, of course, they have no shortage of Toronto representatives in the new government. They have all 25 seats in Toronto, so we talked to a number of the MPs, but again, focusing on Scarborough.
Did you get any pushback at all from the other levels of government on the fact that you wanted to change the original plan?
No, I think because they recognized, and the reason we put it forward as part of a presentation, not just saying, hey, how would you like to reopen the issue to change it and make it better? When we presented it to them and we put forward a presentation that was very logical and very fact-based. And the extraordinary part of all this may well be that it represents one of the first decisions made in a long time, not just in transit, but other areas, that actually was based on facts and evidence.
Because that doesn't happen too often.
No, it doesn't, because unfortunately, and I'm a politician now, so I can't speak of politicians in the third party, which I used to do when I was a talk show host, but you are driven by a number of different imperatives that are governing your behavior and your decision making. But in this case, I really felt the facts stood behind making this change. And as it did in Smart Track, which is the transit proposal for people outside the Toronto area that I put forward, and the west end of that was meant to be a tunnel that went all the way to Mississauga. And the studies by the experts showed that that was going to be too expensive and too cumbersome. And so I said, well, based on the facts and based on the evidence, we will now have it travel above ground. We'll still have a transit connection between Mississauga and Markham, but it's going to be different. And to me, this is how decisions should be made. And maybe it's the serenity that comes to a certain degree with age, that when you're in these offices, and with a lack of ambition to go to some other political office, I have none, that allows you to say, look, that's how we should make decisions. And I think you'll get respected for that, not criticized for it.
At the end of the day, though, as we've often talked about, you're one vote out of 45 on council. So you need a lot of help to get this plan through. And there is a group on your council, I guess, called the moderate middle sometimes, or more pejoratively, the mushy middle sometimes, that needs to be assuaged. How did you do that?
Just went and made the presentation to them, and I think what they were persuaded by were, first of all, these facts that I've talked about that made this a persuasive case that we get more transit for Scarborough. You get a subway connection to the civic center of Scarborough, the heart of the city of Scarborough, which is, by the way, a city of 625,000 people, the only one that doesn't have a rapid transit connection between its city center and the rest of the city. And we get other transit beyond that, serving 5 other neighborhoods and so on, and the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. And the second thing, and I almost dare to say it might have been more important, is we could bring this kind of civil war, as some have described it, to an end. We can finally develop enough of a consensus that it can get your support, the mushy middle people, and the support of the Scarborough people, and the support of others. And while nothing ever happens unanimously in that place, it seems, we could get as close to that as possible, and I think that's where we've ended up.
Given how volatile this story has been, and given the fact, you've described it as a war, how is it that almost until the very moment you were set to announce this, nobody leaked it?
I have no idea, because one of the things that I found it when I worked for Premier Davis. I found it when I worked for Prime Minister Mulroney. I now find it as mayor that one of the greatest challenges you have, and it's particularly a challenge with the media, is to try and keep stories under wraps, not because you're trying to keep a secret or prove you can, but you want the story to come out ideally under your own narrative. You want to tell the story your way as opposed to answering questions about it. And so we lasted until the day before.
Yep.
We were not successful.
You almost made it, though.
We were not successful in the end, but getting to the day before is quite an accomplishment, because by then we'd briefed, I think, 20 councillors, and normally if you're briefing 20 councillors about anything, no disrespect to them, you might as well just issue a press release. So,
you know who leaked it in the end?
No, we don't, and I don't care. It doesn't matter. I mean, in the end, I think it surfaced relatively positively, and so now the key is to get it built. Steve, I find, I've been in this office for a year and a bit now, and I find that if anything else, people are not so much polarized on subway versus LRT or this or that. They just want us to get some things done. They're saying, look, enough talk. You've had enough debates and enough decisions. And so I think a lot of people are of that view as well. And they want to join me in saying, fine, we found a better way. Now let's do it.
Will this new plan still require a special property tax levy to pay for it?
Well, it's the same one.
Same one.
I mean, the same one that was there
So
to
the
pay for the
financing is the
city's
same.
share of this, because the great thing about this new and better plan is that you get better and more transit for the east part of the city for the same money. You get the subway extension because it's been simplified, and so it's going to cost less. And you get an LRT that services the Scarborough campus of U of T, and you do all that for approximately the same funding envelope. So the bottom line is the levy's already there, and it will pay for the city's share.
Once it all started to, you forgive my curiosity, but I am sort of wondering how
You
this
love
all...
this stuff.
I do. I do wonder how all this kind of thing comes together and how decisions are made. And once you realized, okay, the Scarborough councillors are on side, the Mushy Middle's on side, the province is on side, the feds are on side, was there a moment where you sort of looked around maybe at your staff and kind of were astonished that this is actually working?
I was pleasantly surprised, but I really mean what I said about I think the serenity that comes with sort of knowing, first of all, you're doing the right thing, and knowing that people, I think if you're honest and they know you're trying to move things forward, will forgive you the fact that it's not exactly what was discussed in an election or whatever. I think that's all they want. They want you to make progress on the issues, to get some things done, to turn down the level of acrimony and furious debate. And I think that I was comfortable that, you know, that the consensus we'd seen among the council was going to be reflective of the same reaction we'd see among the public. And so away we went. And, you know, the universe will unfold as it should, because we have some steps left to, you know, to take, even with where we are today.
In hindsight, did you feel at all queasy about having to defend something that you knew was, well, in hindsight, second rate?
I went to the Toronto Star editorial board about 3 years ago. Before I was the mayor, I was the head of something called Civic Action at that time. So they asked me, would you proceed, yes or no, with the Scarborough subway? And it was not a question that was on the table that day. I wasn't expecting it. And I described it that day as barely defensible. So from the beginning, when I was asked for the first time publicly to state an opinion, I said barely defensible. And I believed it was in its original form. I think it is way more defensible now as a sort of something that will attract jobs, serve people, because you're getting a much better plan with more transit for the money. So, of course, I was queasy, even though I'd said it was barely defensible, about tampering with something that did have all this political support, which is unusual. As you know, to get all three governments to agree on what day it is normally a challenge in our country. So, yes, I was a bit queasy, but I knew it was the right thing to do, so we just went ahead, and, you know, we've got lots left to do to get all this done, but I'm pretty determined.
This is not meant to be a gotcha question, but it is. Again, I'm interested in how these things come together, and is one of the lessons here that you really only make great progress on great projects when things happen away from the prying eyes of the public? Because all of this happened behind closed doors, and no one knew it was happening.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the work to sort of lay the groundwork, yes, has to be done in private, but in the end, Steve, you still have to sell these things to the public. So, you know, I think yes and no. Yes, you can do a lot of this kind of going out and testing a concept on people that are decision makers privately, and then they emerge as one to say this is a better idea. And so I think it is a lesson in that regard, but you know, you still have to pass the test with the public, because again, I have to seek re-election, so do all the councillors, so do all the MPPs, and if people are unanimously against what you're putting forward, then you know, you won't be getting too far with it.
We may have just made some news, so you are definitely seeking re-election then.
Oh, you know, I've always said I'd like to serve 2 terms. I've been told by my wonderful wife, Barbara, that if I try to serve more than 2 terms, I'll be living in a small apartment by myself. But I would like to seek 2 terms. Why? Because while I now have come to believe in term limits, because I think there can be people, you know, it's not about them as individuals, but you can have the same people there for too long. I think an 8-year period of time is a time when you can actually see these projects. Like, you could see the shovels well into the ground and things well under construction for Smart Track, for the Scarborough Subway, for other things. And otherwise, what happens if you come and go, it is too easy for somebody else to come in and say, well, we haven't really started that yet. Let's just cancel that and do something else. And I think there's a need now for us to get on with these projects, not to let them get bogged down, not to change our minds now and just say we're moving ahead, because the need for this public transportation in the whole GTA is desperate. It's desperate. It's not just much needed or nice to have, it's desperate.
The way it all came together, though, does it make you reevaluate the value of transparency in putting these kinds of projects together?
It makes me reevaluate or just have greater appreciation for 2 things. One is transparency, and 2 is professional advice. And I will say to you that our planning staff, led by Jennifer Keesmaat, and people will have a chance to see her for themselves if they haven't seen her before, but she's an intelligent
right after you.
woman. She's got a great team of people, and it doesn't mean you have to follow what they say each and every time to the letter, but it means you should respect their advice, and it means they can often work to produce a better result because they have in their possession all these facts and all this evidence. And so I learned those 2 lessons. I knew them before, but you know, life is about having things happen to you that reinforce lessons you knew. And so transparency and professional public service is certainly something that was brought home.
Given the huge change between this plan and the previous plan, is it reasonable to suspect that there will be other changes and or fixes to this plan going forward?
I hope in principle it can remain relatively intact, because I think what we've done is taken the subway connection to the Scarborough Civic Centre, Scarborough Town Centre area, and that makes sense, and it was part of plans going all the way back. I dare say, and I've said this before, if my mentor and friend, Bill Davis, had not built the Scarborough RT, which again for the listeners was this sort of experimental transit that Ontario invested in back in the kind of 70s and 80s, had he not built the Scarborough RT that went to the Scarborough Town Centre, we would have extended the Bloor Danforth subway east to Scarborough Town Centre many years ago. And so now when that thing is obsolete, it's going to be done. And so I hope that those kinds of fundamental principles don't change, but will we have to change a little thing here or a little thing there in order to make it work from the standpoint of engineering and designing these kinds of things? Of course. But as long as you stay the course on the principle of what it is you're trying to do, and we've now amended that, I'll admit, we've amended that to make it better and to make it more acceptable to more people, I think now we should get on with it.
Let's finish up on this, and this is sort of the overarching philosophical question about your mayoralty right now. The knock on you has been, you've been in office for a little more than a year now. No question he has brought dignity to the mayor's office that was not there before. The Ford circus is over. There are many people who are very happy about that. However, I guess the criticism has been up until now, you can't point to any singular major accomplishment that you've managed to get through council, I guess until this Scarborough subway thing happened. And that's what you're ultimately going to be judged on.
Do you know what, Steve? They said when my first budget was forthcoming, this would be a real struggle for me to get it through, and people were writing about it and saying it wasn't going to happen and it was impossible, and it got through. And the budget contained in it a $100 million investment in public transit, the biggest in the history of the city in 1 year. It included things like free transit for kids 12 and under and huge improvements, in fact, restoring a lot of the cuts made to transit by my predecessor. This year, we got through, with a unanimous vote, a poverty reduction strategy, which I happen to believe is extremely important. We got every member of council to agree on it, and we're funding it. Notwithstanding anything you hear or read, this year's portion of that and last year's were funded. And I could go on and name you other things that we have approved as a council. So people want to write and say this stuff because they believe that somebody that tries to seek consensus, somebody that probably on Monday will aggravate some people more on the quote-unquote left, and on Tuesday aggravate some people more on the quote-unquote right, that somehow there's something wrong with that. I don't see there, you see, as being any contradiction in terms between having a balanced budget that keeps taxes low and investing in anti-poverty mechanisms. That's who I am. It's the kind of leadership I'm going to provide. And I will just tell you, judge my record, not day by day, hour by hour, especially don't take it from people who are, wanting to criticize what I do. Judge my record when I've served 4 years or 8 years, and I think you'll find there's going to be more transit built, more people that are going to be lifted out of poverty, more addressing of the issues of the city when it comes to the inequalities that are faced by people, more of the city unifying itself so that it really is one Toronto instead of Scarborough versus Etobicoke. And that's the kind of leadership I'm bringing, and I will continue to bring it, and what people write about it is entirely up to them, but I know what people tell me when I see them every day. And they say, you're doing a great job. And I'm not saying that means it's reason for complacency or that I'm perfect, but they feel confident that we're moving the city forward. And that's all you can do. They want you to be honest. They want you to make some progress on the issues. They want you to be as determined as you can and work hard and behave properly. And I think on that account, they know we're human beings. And I'm just a human being, just like you and just like all the people watching. And, I think that the city will be better for the combined leadership we all bring, but me as mayor and the council as the council. And, we'll see. You can judge that when my first term is up, as I'm sure you will.
We look forward to your next visit here when we will play back some of the tape from this interview.
You always do.
And check and see.
No. Thank you.
John Tory, 65th Mayor of Toronto. Always good of you to join us at TVO. Thanks so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.